Hi, Dawson. Welcome to the show. What an honor it is to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Vanessa, it's a delight to be here.
Oh, I am wildly thrilled to have you. It is just, as we were kind of speaking off air, this is just a very exciting topic. I think it's a challenge for a lot of us, this whole area of, health and neuroscience and how the brain works and all of that. I mean, it really pertains to everything in life, I think, and we'll get into some of that, but really it is an honor. Before we get going, why don't you give us a little bit of a snapshot on your life, your experience, and why you are sitting in such an established position in this field, I should say, in the first place, because you have quite a history. So give us a little bit of a snapshot for us.
Well, I began the way most of us begin, and that is confused and uncertain of my place in the world and life. And I know when I was a teenager, and most teenagers began asking themselves some big questions about meaning and the purpose of their lives and so on. And sometimes there are ways of understanding that early on in life. Often there's not. And so I was in that space when I was a teenager, and I first of all began to focus on spirituality and what spirituality could do. I got out of the fundamentalist church I'd been in because I found there was so much hypocrisy there, and there was such a huge gap between the words that were spoken and the actual behaviors that I saw in among the clergy that I just couldn't stay there any longer. So I went and I explored various kinds of other spirituality and found the same kind of gap between the preaching and the action. And so I became really disillusioned with all that. Went to psychology, and of course, you soon discover if you're in the field of psychology that most people that are in that field are deeply wounded and looking to remedy their own issues. And so that was another whole set of discoveries. And eventually, I had a really real crisis in my mid 40s, and I decided to begin meditating every single day. I actually made that decision on a Monday, and I began meditating the next day, Tuesday, every single day without fail. And I found that very, very quickly, within a few weeks, all the different domains of my life, money, relationships with my children. I had two children, and I was a single dad at the time. So all of those things began to shift in powerful ways. My health began to change. I became much, much healthier. And I became intrigued by this and eventually began to do some research. And I put together research teams from various universities, and we looked at questions like when you shift your inner state, when you shift your mindset, when you shift your beliefs, when you shift your energy toward various big questions in life, like things that cause you anxiety and depression, if you can release that kind of stress, if you can change your mood, what happens in your body? The picture that began to emerge in our research over the course of the last 30 years was remarkable things happen in your body. So I put together information from various different branches of science into a book called The Genie in Your Genes. And it's all about epigenetics and about how all of these intangible things, energy medicine, various kinds of energy healing, remote healing, prayer, and other forms of seemingly non-local and immaterial influences have direct influences measurable down to the level of the genome. And that research was so exciting. And then after many years of doing that, especially focusing on relieving PTSD, because PTSD is this absolutely enormous social problem. We have about 2 million Americans who've come back from the wars in the Middle East with and about a third of them have diagnosable PTSD. We have people who've been traumatized in all kinds of ways. Many of us, even if we had no major trauma in our lives, have had enough bad things happen to where it takes its toll, and it takes its toll on the body. The body keeps the score. And so I have begun to do a lot of research, not only on that, and then apply that to various social problems like working with veterans, but I've also then begun to see what happens after we release trauma. And the most exciting frontier of research nowadays is that we know that as we shift our stress, as we shift our minds, as we release PTSD, all of these changes happen in our brains, the way our nervous systems function, our genes, our hormones, our enzymes. all of these change inside our bodies. But what's now the new frontier of research for me is how when we move into transcendent states, when we pray, when we meditate, when we have inspired moments in our lives, those things affect all of those physiological systems as well and produce radical results. So that's just a brief snapshot of where I've been, where I've gone to, and also along the way I discovered how to be extremely happy. So that's a good side effect of the above.
Just as a byproduct, right? Well, first of all, I love that I love that I just want to say off the bat for those that don't know that you are the founder of this organization regarding veterans and PTSD, which I find to be extremely, I don't know, just awesome. I think it's called the Veteran Stress Solution.
Yes.
And I love that because there is such a huge problem. And I think that we probably underestimate just how critical that problem is. But I love the fact that you pointed to the reality that PTSD is not only about going to war as an example. It really has to do with, sometimes just everyday things that are stacking up. It doesn't have to be one massive explosion in your life, or maybe it is an explosion, but it's something different, right? Like we were talking off air, like a health crisis that happens, or something goes on in a relationship, right? Maybe there's some toxicity or some abuse, big or small, or I should say like minor or major. And so these things get stuck. And I think that it's wonderful that people like you are highlighting how the brain can actually change. Because I think we hear like, oh, you just have to change your mindset. But we don't really understand how that process works. And I think that sometimes when we understand how it works, it's even more it's motivating because we are like, wow, this has a direct, it's not like indirect, it's not passive. It's so direct in terms of how these I guess, methods that we can apply in our life can have such a drastic impact on how our physiological body responds and then therefore the way that we walk out our life. It's just fascinating to me. I know that there's so many questions that I want to ask you. It's like crazy. I have things stacking up as I talk. I know that EFT is also a part of your work. And for those that are, I was sharing with you that I did interview Brad Yates about a year ago on EFT or tapping. But for those of you or those people that do not know what EFT is, can you go into that a little bit and how you've explored that area and then how it pertains to the work that you've done?
Yeah, EFT is a very simple stress reduction method, and applying EFT to a stressor, usually a stressful thought, a stressful memory, a stressful situation, takes under 2 minutes. So it's very, very quick to apply EFT. And the way it's done is that you think about the thing that bothered you. And we're doing this with people who have stressors in their lives, like, for example, a situation at work, perhaps that is tense and unresolved, or perhaps a family relationship with a spouse or a child or a parent or someone in the family where there's friction, and maybe there's a history of various kinds of neglect, abuse, or other events from the past. So we have them remember these things. Now, when we get into that memory, when we start to actually activate those memories again, a part of the brain lights up called the limbic system, and it has to do with memory, learning, and emotion. And the limbic system is it's just an amazing part of the brain. It has many different components to it, and it is key to memory, learning, and also relearning and unlearning. So all of these functions are held in the central part of the brain, the limbic system. And so when people think about the car crash, the terrible thing my colleague said to me, the childhood insult or injury, the war injury, whatever the event might be, that part of the brain lights up. It becomes active in response to stressful memories and emotional events. And so that part of the brain can be read on an MRI or an EEG, and it just lights up when we are processing emotion. What EFT has people do after they light up the limbic system is it has them apply pressure in the form of tapping with your fingertips on various acupuncture points. And there is a very simple set of 8 points we use for basic EFT. There's an expanded set of 13 points. There are various other techniques, and actually there are a bunch of advanced techniques as well with EFT. But in its simplest form, you simply are spending a minute or two tapping on these 8 points while you remember the event. And Vanessa, what we see in EEG studies is absolutely stunning. We see that person thinking about that trauma, their limbic system is highly lit up, high degree of emotional arousal. As they tap, it just goes away. The limbic system just calms down. We don't do therapy with them. We don't talk to them about it. We don't try and justify it or explain it or heal it in any way. We simply break the link between the memory and the fight or flight response. Before that, every time they thought about the car crash, they are going back into the fight or flight response, even though the car crash may have been 3 years ago or 30 years ago. And that limbic activation is still happening when they think about the unpleasant memory. Once you think about the unpleasant memory and you tap, it gives the body a cue of safety. And that cue of safety, that cue of tapping on these points, removes that stressor, removes that stressful feeling, and breaks the association in the limbic system between the event and going into fight or flight. And our work with veterans shows that in randomized controlled trials, when we do long-term follow-ups, 3 months, 6 months, a year, even 2 years in some studies, that once you break the association between the memory and the fight or flight response one time with EFT, it is usually broken forever. So, like one young veteran I worked with had a incredibly uh, terrible memory, and he had been in the Battle of Fallujah in Iraq in 2004.
Wow.
And one of the things he had to do after the battle was he had to clean the uniform of a colleague, a friend of his who died, who had been killed. And part of what they do is they clean up the uniform, send them back to the next of kin back in the US. And he had this job of cleaning his dead friend's uniform, which was just incredibly triggering. He was 10 out of 10 around that memory of cleaning the uniform, and also smelled really bad after being in the Iraqi sun for a few days. There was just this terrible smell. He called that the worst day of his life. He was a 10 out of 10 on this. I had him relive every detail of that terrible event. Now that was very painful for him, but he was tapping the whole time, and his numbers went down to a 8 and a 6 and a 5 and a 4 and a 3. And eventually he was at a low number, just a 1 or a 2. I ran into him a few months later. I asked him again about cleaning the uniform, the worst day of his life. And he said, I'm a 0. There was an act of love. I was so glad I was the one who got the job of cleaning his uniform because I knew him, and I could
Wow.
send that uniform back to his parents in the US with the love that went with it after me cleaning that uniform. So it had turned that event for him from the worst day of his life into an act of love. And that's the kind of cognitive shift we see when people heal at the emotional level and you calm the limbic system. So again, long term, EFT is able to break that association between the memory and that physiological trigger of fight or flight. And once broken, it stays broken. And that's just a quick rundown of what EFT is and what it does.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for sharing that story. That is incredible. God bless him too. You know, it seems as though basically, I mean, just in layman's terms, it's like the event just becomes I don't know, a story. And it's there's the emotional response changes. So it's no longer the quote unquote trauma. It just becomes something that's more like almost like a, I don't want to say an everyday thing, but something that just doesn't have the attachment. And I have a couple questions for you regarding this. My first question is, whether it is something as drastic or dramatic as this young man, this veteran and his experience, or it is say a small child who is experiencing a conversation or a back and forth with an adult, and maybe there's a word that's used or there's something that really sticks with that child, but it's such a micro trauma. Would you say that the same, like if it was shown side by side on an MRI, would you say the same exact thing is going on in the limbic system and in the brain? Like both with that child as that child grows up, and has that experience, and the veteran, even though they're drastically different, like would those changes look super similar? I guess I'll stop there because I feel like if I keep going, I'll overwhelm you.
You'll ask too big a question. It'll take more than an hour to answer.
Exactly. Exactly. I'm like, no, I'm going to stop right here.
Yeah, and so we do see that activation of the limbic system if people are emotionally aroused by a memory. But what is very interesting is that there's no like certain class of memories that's automatically traumatic and another class of memories that is not traumatic. So, for example, of those veterans who've been through the wars in the Middle East, two-thirds of them have the similar experiences of civilian deaths, deaths of their friends, all of the sights and sounds of war, and two-thirds of them do not develop PTSD. What's the difference? They've had the same experiences. Children, some have very, very difficult experiences. Some are abused and don't get PTSD. Others do. And so it's not the event, it is the emotional impact of the event on that person. And for some people, like I have three children, and my eldest son, for example, he was really highly um, resilient and robust, and he just would not. I mean, he just basically was a really joyful kid from a very early age onward. And my daughter, though, was very easily wounded. So something that wouldn't wound my son at all would wound her. And so it differs from child to child, person to person. So it's not the class of the event, category of the event. It's what was it like for you? And so something that might have really hurt somebody else may not hurt you. And your description at the very beginning of the question, which was that it's just a story, that's the criterion. You'll have people tell you stories of absolute mayhem. Well, I mean, we worked with people who were survivors of the Rwanda genocide and saw their parents hacked to death with machetes in 1994, and now it's just a story to them. It's just something that happened in the past. Are they are they sad about it? Yeah. Are they disabled by it? Absolutely not. And so that's resilience. That's the quality we have to cultivate. So yeah, it looks the same in terms of arousal in the limbic system, but what triggers that arousal will differ from person to person.
Wow. Fantastic explanation. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Would you say that the average person, I mean, I know with say with the veteran, just as an example, because you used that beautiful story, did those changes happen just within one session of tapping, 1 2 minute session, or is this something that with a lot of people see they have to keep repeating this over and over?
That was about a probably 30 or 40-minute session, and I had him get into all the details of the event, which I don't want to describe here because they were pretty horrific.
Mm.
But he was tapping as he thought about detail after detail. What you'll find when if you work with an EFT practitioner, and I recommend that everybody at least have an EFT practitioner that they know they can connect with when they feel overwhelmed or as though life is too much for them. EFT is self-help. You can tap on all kinds of things very quickly and easily by yourself. If you're into long-term habits, if you're into psychological trauma, certainly for complex PTSD, you do need a trained clinical EFT practitioner. So I recommend people have those practitioners available for when they need them. But many things you can work through yourself, and when you do, you'll work on the details. If you work on say a car crash, you might find, especially if you're working with a professional, they're going to ask you, what did you hear? And you'll describe the sound of the metal tearing, the glass breaking, the tire screeching. They might ask you what you smelled, and you might have smelled burning rubber. You might have smelled blood. They'll talk to you in great detail about all the things that happened and tap on each one of those things. So they're able to go in there and clear all the different aspects of that memory. And the cool thing about this is that even if you have 1,000 bad memories to work on, Once your limbic system realizes that this class of memory is not a threat to your survival in the here and now, it tends to remove the emotional charge around many other events as well. So, for example, somebody went through, say, a nightmarish 4 years of abuse and divorce. And we won't work on the 4 years of abuse and divorce. We will work on the one thing. We'll ask them questions. One woman said, it was the day my husband showed up at the door to get the kids, and he had his new wife with him. So that was the event within the 4 years that was the most triggering moment. So I wasn't content with that. I asked what was the worst part of him showing up at the door. So she opened, I described the whole thing. She went to the door, she opened the door, he was standing there, and it was the expression on his wife's face, his new wife's face, and particularly the look in her eyes. And that turned out to be the big emotional trigger. We tapped on that, and she went down from a 10 out of 10 around the whole 4 years to about a 2 out of 10 around the whole 4 years. So if you work in this really detailed way, and again, our practitioners are trained to help people get into these details and learn these. Also, my book, the EFT Manual, tells you on page 112, I think, how to get into all this yourself. It'll show you how to work with these details, and that way, when you are really thorough with one group of events, one category of events, all the other events in that category tend to reduce in emotional intensity.
Wow. So you kind of already answered the question that I was going to ask you, which is I have a feeling that there are people listening that really, don't necessarily have one specific event, but they are suffering, right? They're suffering from anxiety or it's just a combination of life, right? Like life is lifing them and they're just not at peace. They're imbalanced. I feel like I'm a little bit like that. Now I do have a couple things that were prominent, right? I have a couple things that probably, if they were to disappear and dissolve today, I would probably be a lot more peaceful, right? But there's also like these small things, or almost like you can't really put your finger on it. So I guess you sort of covered it, but if there's anything else you want to say, if there are people listening that are just like, I just feel like I'm on edge. I didn't have a traumatic experience. My marriage is okay for the most part. My kids are okay, but it's just like regular kid stress. My work is my work, and don't always love it, but don't really hate it. But I just don't feel great. Like life is feeling less than joyful. Is something where they could probably walk down this road by themselves as long as they had a little bit of a guidance, say by your book or something of that nature, or videos? Or is an EFT practitioner or someone who can guide them really still something that they would need?
Well, two or three observations there. One is that we have known in science, in medicine, for a century that anxiety and depression and other conditions like that are ones that affect your health. They affect your physical health. But one study that was a real shocker was published in the British Medical Journal in 2012, and it expected to find that people with high levels of anxiety and high levels of depression had reduced lifespans. And indeed, that was just a pretty much a no-brainer finding that high anxiety, high depression levels were accompanied by reduced lifespans. What was absolutely shocking about that study was 68,000 adults. It found that people with low-level anxiety over the 8 years of the study had about a 30% greater chance of dying than those with no anxiety. So we now have had confirmation from science that low-level anxiety is not innocuous. It results in a significant, and that's just all-cause mortality. It wasn't trying to determine whether they were dying of cancer or heart diseases or strokes, whatever it might be. But death from all causes was significantly, enormously greater in people with low-level anxiety. So when I hear people say, "Oh, I have low-level anxiety, no big deal," please go get EFT, work with a practitioner, go on our website. We have hundreds of tap along videos. We have tons of community things, like we have something called Tapping Tuesdays, where we have live tapping every Tuesday with one of our certified clinical EFT practitioners. And so you can do that. There are, again, hundreds of videos, thousands of pages, free pages on EFT Universe. You can type in your complaint and find a stories of people who have used EFT for that issue. So it's a
Wow.
wonderful resource, and do use it yourself and do work on that low level anxiety. And then again, have a practitioner for the big things, especially persistent things. Like an example is weight loss. People usually, if they have problems losing weight and keeping it off long term, there's usually something in there that is really interfering with their patterns. The average American woman actually loses her body weight and regains it over the course of her lifetime 9 times. She loses her entire body weight in yo-yo dieting, going down and then up and then down and then up. 9 times what she weighs over the course of her lifetime. She spends an average of $250,000 in the process. So, please, if you are dealing with a persistent issue like having trouble losing weight, go and work with a weight loss practitioner on our site. Read one of our books. We have programs. We have free tapping. We have a whole bunch of different levels of things you can do. And that's a persistent issue where you'll do much better working with somebody who knows the territory than trying to figure it out by yourself. Relationship issues. You have people who have yo-yo relationships and they get into relationships. They're all happy and thrilled for the first few months, and then things go south, and then they're out of the relationship, and then they're into the next relationship. People repeat their relationship patterns, and there are a whole bunch of scientific reasons why. We have hormonal set points. We have set points for our behaviors. We tend to reenact our early life patterning in our adult relationships. It's called attachment and attachment style, and it is extremely difficult to break those old family patterns. So if you are dealing with something that's a persistent issue like money sabotage. I mean, I worked with one woman, for example, who she was a extremely smart human being. She was a licensed clinical social worker. She had an incredibly successful practice, made lots of money in her practice, and she'd made hundreds of thousands of dollars and lost it, and made hundreds of thousands of dollars and lost it. And she'd been through this cycle of making lots and lots of money and losing it all several times in her life. And she was like in her early 40s. And so we dug down a little deeper. And with the aid of tapping, we found the core events and the core story behind that, which was that she came from a poor family. And she had this unconscious belief that by having lots of money, she was violating the patterns of the tribe, of the community. And that if she did that, if she had lots of money when her family was by and large poor, she wouldn't be accepted by them. So getting rid of the money was her way of getting acceptance. And once we discovered that trigger, the whole pattern collapsed. So you again, could she have figured that out by herself? Well, being a therapist for 20 plus years and even tapping a lot hadn't helped her find that. But in one session with a competent professional, she was able to do that. So
Wow.
that's why I say you're much better off just working with somebody. And again, we have tons of resources on our website. Just go there and then work with these issues and do it now. I mean, don't
Yeah.
wait 5 years and do it. Don't wait 10 years and do it. Again, that low level anxiety, those issues, they are hurting your body. They are epigenetic. They are triggering neural pathways. They're triggering patterns of inflammation. They're lowering your immunity. They're producing significant physiological effects on your body. So you want to grab a hold of this stuff and treat this as your top priority for your health and well-being today.
Today. Well, I feel called out. I don't know. I don't know if everybody else feels that way, but I feel called out in the best way. No, because I was, as you and I were talking sort of before, I was telling you that it's like we can have all the knowledge in the world. And even this is such a fantastic example. I mean, she was a therapist. She was in the field and yet she was still struggling. And it's like, from an objective seat, you can really help somebody and you can offer all of the best advice. But when it's you and you're struggling and you could even know it, But a lot of this stuff is sitting under the surface and it's sitting on a subconscious level and you're not even, it's almost like you can't see it without maybe somebody who's skilled enough to get you to that place, And so I think that that's really that's a huge message. And friends, I hope that you are taking this in because I think that, I am definitely putting myself in the same category. I struggle as well. And I share sometimes about my struggles here on the show, depending on the episode. And there are things that I'm just like, wow, how am I still here? Right? Like I know all of this, like I know all of this information. Like what, like, but we're human and we are wired, and it takes consistency, I think, to your point. And I think it takes sometimes guidance to be able to break these very powerful patterns. And it's not that our bodies or our brains, and we're really gonna segue into the brain now because I want to talk more about like the thoughts become things aspect of this. But it's not that they're broken. It's not that they're so beautifully designed. Um, and we're so wonderfully designed. But in the same breath, it's like our body is just trying to protect ourselves, it's trying to do what it can do to keep us going and to keep us afloat. And sometimes that looks like that it's, not doing the right thing, I should say. But in reality, it is doing the right thing. And sometimes we just need a little bit of training, a little bit of guidance. What do you have to say about that?
Go straight for the brain change.
Mm,
I am not in no way against behavior change and thought change and mind change, but change your brain.
yeah.
Don't mess around with half measures. Go for things that change the brain and change the brain fast. I did a randomized controlled trial of a meditation method I developed called eco meditation. And I
Mm,
developed eco meditation because I wanted something science based. I wanted something that was really based in solid research studies. And I stacked several proven methods on top of each other. So it uses tapping, it uses heart coherence, it uses biofeedback, neurofeedback, self-hypnosis, mindfulness. It uses all of these in a very, very brief 6 or 7 minute routine, after which you do some affirmations, stay out there for a while in that wonderful transcendent space you achieve, and then you ground yourself and come back. So we got this is a really large scale study because it was a randomized controlled trial. We had a control group doing a mindful breathing exercise and experimental group doing eco meditation for 1 month. And after 1 month doing eco meditation for only 20 minutes a day, we found structural anatomical changes in the brain. Now, this is absolutely amazing. We know if we go to the gym, we start lifting weights, we'll see our muscles change, our bodies will shift in the way they look. So we're very used to be able to see the effects of exercising our muscles in the way our external appearance looks. But it takes a while. It takes, going to the gym for usually a few years to see some big changes happening in your body. And so that leads us to focus very much on outer appearance and slow progress. Our brain does not change that way. Our brain changes really, really fast. In my book, This Brain, I have images from a scanning electron microscope, and it shows two neurons firing together and they're kind of wiggling at the edges of the screen as they fire, and then they grow together and they finally shake hands and interlock. They wire together,
yeah.
and the whole thing takes 12 seconds. Every 12 seconds, you hold the behavior, you hold the thought. When you meditate, when you elevate your thinking, when you pray, when you feel positive emotions, when you enter transcendent space, escaping your small local ego, when you move into the sense of connection with a higher power, then that starts to produce brain change in a few seconds. And within 30 days, we found of doing eco meditation, people's brains shifted dramatically, with the suffering part of the brain, the part of the brain that holds the ego, that holds clinging to the old, that part of the brain just went dark. The compassion part of the brain lit up like a Christmas tree. So that was the result of only 30 days. And so just again, start now. Go for the brain change. It's fine to read inspirational books, take courses, go listen to your favorite teacher, but do the stuff that changes your brain, because then you have a neurological substrate for resilience. You aren't trying to be resilient as a feeling. You have a resilient brain. And that way, when the next bad thing happens, you have that as a hardwired set of circuits in your brain that you can rely on. So that's really what I recommend people do. In Bliss Brain, for example, I look at the whole vast field of MRI research into meditation. And it shows that many forms of meditation are effective, mildly effective, but some forms of meditation are incredibly effective. And so you want to use the things that are evidence-based that are really effective. I'll give you one final example because I'm working on a new book for the last 5 years called Spiritual Intelligence. It's not published yet. It'll be out in a few months, but in spiritual intelligence, I'm taking this brain change angle and I'm applying it to the most severe adverse brain change case there is, and that's Alzheimer's disease. In
Mhm.
Alzheimer's disease, we see cognitive function decline. People lose their memory. People become confused. People become anxious. People lose various abilities as their cognitive function changes. Their brains shrink. The average human brain, natural shrinkage of your brain between 40 and 85, your brain naturally loses a few neurons every year. Natural brain shrinkage between age 40 and age 85 is 25%. So the brain of the 85-year-old is 25% smaller than it was at 40. And that's quite a bit of brain change. The Alzheimer's patient brain change, brain shrinkage is 70%. And essentially, with Alzheimer's patients, we see these little walnuts of brains sort of rattling around in this huge big skull because the brain has just shrunk so much. So, uh, the newest research, which I'm covering in this forthcoming book, Spiritual Intelligence, shows that people who use evidence-based meditation techniques who are Alzheimer's patients, again, the researchers are tracking them versus a control group, and they're measuring the rate of shrinkage of their brain. And we know that just year by year, they're losing neural mass in their brain. And so in these longer term studies now, 6 months, a year of effective forms of meditation, they're showing that the brain shrinkage of those Alzheimer's patients doesn't slow down, it reverses, and their brains begin getting larger with an effective method. So,
Wow.
again, go for the brain change, go for the science.
Wow. There's so many, I have so many thoughts in my brain right now. I don't even know where to go. I don't even know where to go. But okay, first of all, it's interesting. I'll just share this because it just, I was thinking about it as you were talking. I had just written a recent post on Instagram this week and it wasn't even planned. It was something that just came to me out of the blue. And maybe it was something subconscious because I was interviewing you in a couple of days and, there was some sort of weird connection that I didn't even really, notice. But I was talking about, how we have all these things that we implement in life, right? Like say we're on a journey of healing. Say we really want to get healthier. Say we're so focused on the food change and the exercise and the supplementation, targeted supplementation. And I'm all about that stuff, right? Maybe there's some modalities. Maybe we're implementing the sauna or we've got a gadget that we're going to use. And all the fun stuff, and I'm a fan of all the fun stuff. But if you're doing all of those things, and I'm speaking from very high experience here, if you're doing all of those things and yet you have a thought pattern that's like cycling over and over and over again every single day, that's producing negative thoughts and you're looking at your situation or your life in a way that's not helpful, those things might be somewhat helpful, but I don't think that they are going to be the end all be all to your to where you want to go. And so it's about, like, to your point, it's about targeting the center first, targeting the nucleus, which in this case is the brain. And I think that this is it's also a very hard lesson for me because I almost feel like I have to remind myself that as well. Like, are you focusing on the right things here? Are you, because there's no, there's nothing wrong with having a plan, right? Like, let's do a little bit of this. Let's make sure we eat better. But if you're missing this really critical piece, you're missing it. Like, you're missing it. You're never going to achieve the spot. You're never going to achieve. And I guess it's always it's a journey. It's not like you'll get to the top of the mountain and you're like, okay, I'm good. I've got no other problems. Life is good. My health is perfect. And now I'm done. But I feel like a lot of us, myself included, sometimes forget this. So I don't know if you want to add on to that, but it really just goes to your point of go to the source.
Yeah, and I'm amused by people. Like I went into the home of a friend and I wanted a glass of water, so I opened the kitchen cabinet to get a glass. And the whole cabinet from top to bottom, and it was a tall, high cabinet, was filled with supplements. Absolutely filled with supplements, hundreds and hundreds of supplement bottles. And I was just awed by everything that this man and his wife were taking. And there are people who put so much focus on clean food and clean water and supplementation and superfoods and all these other biohacks. Now, I have to say, I use a lot of those things myself. I use superfoods. I have great nutrition. I eat super clean, and so I really believe it's worth doing all of those things. But if you just look at the effect of negative thinking versus positive thinking on your body, compare that to the effect of whether you're taking ginkgo biloba or not. I mean, we're talking about a flea versus an elephant in terms of the effect on your body. One negative thought one negative thought coupled with strong emotion is going to send your brain into fight or flight. That activates the HPA axis of your body. You start to pump out cortisol. That cortisol is incredibly corrosive.
Mm.
Chronic cortisol over time is associated with loss of bone density, loss of muscle mass, loss of skin elasticity, loss of cognition. It is associated with calcification of the neurons in the brain to do with memory and learning. They literally turn into bone. You become a bonehead if you are stressed long-term. Calcium. And I mean, you want calcium in your teeth. You should not want it in your brain's memory learning centers. And it starts to build up there over time. So all kinds of bad things happen as a result of our consciousness. And that is our hugely rich point over our health. Do we still need to exercise and eat well and treat others in our lives with love and compassion and be generous and giving and altruistic? Absolutely. And it'll tend to trigger all of those healthy behaviors. But it's definitely the place to start. Look at what you can do and focus on what is within your power. And the most potent thing you have is your own consciousness and how you use it. And people are so casual about this. I'll hear them just casually saying a negative thing about themselves or their bodies or their lives or the people around them. And I'm thinking, don't do that. You have no idea how that's hurting your body when you say that negative thing. So it's vital to begin with consciousness, begin with energy, begin with all these intangibles. They are the most potent medical intervention you could possibly implement.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. So much food for thought here. And again, I feel slightly called out, which is a good thing. I really appreciate it a lot. But, I love that you just kind of went and you said language matters essentially, right? So it's not even just self-talk, but it's also what we're projecting out. And, the last few years, I've really been cognizant of how I speak about pain. I'm someone who deals with a lot of chronic pain and who deals with I'm in a long recovery process as well from something that had transpired a few years back. But even when that transpired, I had still been suffering prior to. And I got really used to using words like, oh, my leg is killing me. Or, yep, or like, I'm gonna, gosh, this better go away right now. I'm gonna die. You know what I mean? Like things like that, where it's such a automatic thing that just flies out of your mouth. But now I actually don't use those words because I realize how powerful they are. You might not think on a conscious level that it's a big deal to be using words like this, but it actually is because you are sending a message. And so I try to be really cognizant of that. So if there's anything you want to add to that, please do, because I feel like words matter both for ourselves and also what we're saying to other people.
Yeah, in our workshops, we train people to treat pain as a message from your body. And the response that most of Western medicine has toward pain is to apply pain killers. And so you're trying to kill the pain and you're trying to shoot the messenger. And of course, if you shoot the message doesn't get to you, and then the body has to send another messenger with a bigger message, and you shoot that messenger as well. And then again, the body just has to tell you in a different way. So we train people to treat the pain as a messenger, to take a deep breath, feel the pain. Now, that's hard to do. When you're tapping, it's easier. And in studies, and there are over 20 studies that incorporate a measure of pain, which you'll find on my website, and I have lists of all the research of 200 studies there. And the pain ones show that pain goes down in a tapping session an average of 65%. So there's a two-third drop in both chronic and acute pain because people are tuning into it and they're listening to the messenger. See, then you listen to the messenger, you get the message, and then your body is having to work so hard to share those messages with you. And it turns out that, again, about two-thirds of pain that we thought of as physical is actually emotional. But one thing I have a lot of fun doing, I shouldn't call it fun because I mean these work with pain patients, but at every workshop, when I'm doing the segment on pain, I preferably will work with somebody live in front of the whole room, whether it's a virtual Zoom workshop or a live in-person workshop. I'll ask for volunteers to work with me who have pain that is purely physical, demonstrably physical. And like one woman I worked with, she was elderly, she was close to 80 years old. Her name was Betty. She allowed us to film her. You'll see the movie, the little session on our YouTube channel. And Betty has pain in her left biceps from a rotator cuff tear about 7 years ago. And she woke up after anesthesia with the pain. It had been with her every single day for the previous 7 years. So it was completely, clearly traceable to a single physical day and event, which was a surgery for the rotator cuff pain. And I love working with people like this because my logical mind is saying, Vanessa, well, it's purely physical. How can tapping and acupuncture points give me a break? How can
Yeah.
that possibly changing your energy around this? How can that possibly make a difference? This is clearly a surgical pain. It was there the day after the surgery. It was not there the day before the surgery, and it's always there. It's always been there since then. So, but I sit there with a just an open mind, an attitude of inquiry, and we do a little bit of tapping. And I said to her, we tapped on a bunch of different things around the pain, the surgery, the way she felt about the surgeon, other things. The pain didn't go away, didn't drop very much. And then I asked her to give the pain a name. And she said, Fred. I was like, Fred, nothing else about Fred. I mean, even though I'm, focused on Fred, the pain, and she wound up having stories about Fred, and Fred was somebody in her real life as well. She had unhealed stuff, emotional stuff from a long time before, many decades before. And after we tapped on that, I said, okay, now I want you to move your arm around like you were doing before and tell me what your pain level is now. And it was so amazing to watch this video and see this elderly, sweet, precious woman lifting her arm up and hunting for the pain. She's moving her arm all over the place. Got complete freedom, complete range of motion back again, and there's no pain to be found there. So the body astonishes me with its healing power, even from what I think of as purely physical issues. And so I've learned to have such respect for energy healing. I've learned to have such respect for the body. I've learned to always believe in the possibility of a miracle. Now, is there a miracle every time? No, there is not. In our PTSD research, 1 out of every 10 veterans does not heal. They have clinical PTSD when they walk into the study. They have clinical PTSD when they walk out of the study. So it doesn't work for everybody in every circumstance. But 9 out of 10 is a result I will take for releasing chronic PTSD and chronic pain. So is it perfect? Are there other, I mean, for that one other person, they may need another method. Maybe it is supplementation they need. Maybe it is group therapy. Maybe it's love and hugs that maybe they need a decent relationship. Who
Mm.
knows what they need? It isn't purely energetic the way it is with the other 9 out of 10 people. But again, we can have a huge influence on our healing by just addressing our energy, our thoughts, our mindset, our beliefs, shifting all of that, and then see what's left. I mean, is there still stuff left for me? Like, for example, I've had high blood pressure my whole adult life, and I've tried hawthorn and beets and all these natural remedies, and it brought my blood pressure down, but not to within the desired range. So eventually, after 10 years of trying all the natural stuff, including tapping, I said to my doctor, okay, it's medication. And I was just willing to accept that. It did take medication to bring it down the last few points. So is this a perfect method? Is it a substitute for medicine? No, it isn't. We may need medical treatment in addition to everything else that we use, but we have all of this stuff. We have naturopathy, we have natural cures, we have energy medicine, we have energy healers and healing, we have modern medicine, we have functional medicine, we have meditation, we have all these ancient techniques, modern ones. I mean, we're living in a world that has never made it more possible to live a healthy life. We have the potential of a healthy life and a long life that our parents never had. Human lifespan has doubled in the last century and is set to go up dramatically in the next 50 years as well by all projections. So we have the opportunities to shift our reality in all these ways. But start with energy, start with mindset, start with belief, start with tapping, start with things you really can do for yourself, and then see what else you might need. And that might be the prescription. It might be a mechanical adjustment. It might be something else. But the energy part and the consciousness part is 100% within your control. So do that first and then see what else might be required.
Wow. So, so well said. And I think that's part of the reason why or a lot of the reason why I appreciate your work so much is because you take from so many different avenues, and you're very balanced in your approach, and you're using so many different realms, to say, hey, look, like so many things can help the situation or help your progress or help heal, provide your body and your mind the environment for healing. But really like treat the brain sort of as we were talking about earlier, like as the nucleus, like make sure that you stick there, and you can add all these things in, or there's other areas that you can focus on, or nutrition, or, whatever it is. I mean, there's a million different ways to go. Also, as we sort of start to wind down here, as you were speaking about all of that just a second ago, it made me think of genetics and epigenetics. And I know that was Genie and Your Genes your first book, right? Was that your first book?
I wrote an earlier book called Soul Medicine about
Oh,
energy medicine in general. And then a few years later, I wrote The Genie in Your Genes about energy psychology and epigenetics. That was really the first big best-selling book I,
got
I
it.
wrote. And then a few years later, I wrote Mind to Matter and then Bliss
Yes.
Brain about these extraordinary spiritual states people get into. And then finally, I'm working on a new one called Spiritual Intelligence. That's kind of the culmination of all of this about how we can develop, how we can shut down the stress networks in our brain and turn on the networks that give us that sense of connection with something greater than ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. I cannot wait for your fourth one to come out because that one sounds like it's definitely going to be a must read for me. And I think I was thinking about the Genie and Your Genes book as you were speaking, because I think that it speaks to so much of what you were sharing about a few minutes ago in terms of like epigenetics and genetics and how, as a whole, and this has been mentioned on this show before by other practitioners or guests, but as a whole, how the way we think about our genes, the way we think about how we might be plagued by something because our family has it, or, oh, well, this is just the way it is because my mom had, diabetes. And so here I
Yeah.
am with how those thought patterns and those processes that take place under the surface, it's kind of like this undercurrent, how that has such a massive impact on the way our life unfolds. And I don't know if you want to touch on that. Again, I know we're winding down a little bit here, but you were just so eloquently sharing about all of that. And I thought, wow, there are so many people walking around probably not so unaware of how their thoughts really are becoming things, and they don't have to be that way.
So I'll return back to Alzheimer's because Alzheimer's is kind of the theme disease in spiritual intelligence. And I wasn't expecting that when I first began working on the book, but the Alzheimer's studies of meditation began to kick in. And so Alzheimer's is strongly mediated by two sets of genes. And those are called apogenes, APOE genes, and they have to do with cholesterol transport in the brain and elsewhere. But anyway, they're called apogenes. If you go get a test from 23andMe or a gene company, one of the first things they'll look at is your apogene. And if you have an apogene, there's one, two, three, and four. There are four flavors of apogene. If you have an apogene four from your mother and apogene four from your father, so you have an apogene 4-4 combination, the chances of Alzheimer's are 92%. Okay. If you have an apogene 4 from one parent and apogene 3 from the other, the chances of Alzheimer's are over 70%. If you have a apogene 2 or 2-3, your chances of Alzheimer's are very, very low, but your chances of heart disease are elevated. So again, these things come. So for decades, because the apogenes were discovered way back when, and we known about them for a long time. And so for decades, it's just been a article of faith in medicine. Apogene 4-4, 92% of chance of Alzheimer's. Apogene 3-4, 75% chance of Alzheimer's. Well, in these meditation studies I have been sharing with you, meditation was the biggest single factor in those people's brain change, regardless of apogene. And in another study of negative thinking, they were looking at people's level of negative thinking and comparing it to the deposit of Alzheimer's proteins in their brains. They found that negative thinking was dramatically more influential in whether they developed Alzheimer's or not than their apogene 4-4. So literally, those people with high levels of negative thinking were shrinking their brains and killing themselves prematurely despite their apogene, and those that maybe had perfect genes, didn't have the apogene 4-4, if they had high levels of negative thinking, were able to accelerate Alzheimer's in their lives. So our consciousness, again, is producing this absolutely massive effect on our brain size, brain volume, cognitive function, all of these things into advanced old age. And especially in an era where many of us are living over 100, there are more and more centenarians now. We've been taking lessons from the blue zones where there are people all over the world who are living long lives. We're applying that now in longevity and medicine. You want to have cognition, you want to have mobility, you want to have all of the ability to enjoy life up to that advanced old age you're likely to achieve. So you really want to be taking care of your body and your well-being. And again, the most influential thing you have available is sitting right between your ears right now, waiting for you to turn it on. So
I just, we can't, he can't be throwing the message any harder, friends. I mean, let's be honest. And I think, I think the key, like you said earlier at some point during this amazing discussion is resilience. It's resilience that gets you there. And because how can we expect to live a life where we don't have things that are thrown at us or hard experiences or traumas or tragedies, or that's just not realistic. We are not exempt from any of that. None of us are, but it's about the resiliency. And it's just, I think that we drastically, as I'm learning more and more, even through this talk, it's like we just drastically underestimate how powerful our brains are. And I don't think that I don't even think that, I mean, even as much research as, just even in this discussion alone, you've pointed to so many studies and so forth. And it's like, wow, are we just scratching the surface of how powerful our bodies and brains are? I mean, all of you in the field, seems like and there's probably endless information just in how miraculous we are designed and what is possible for us collectively and individually. I mean, it just seems so vast, and as much as we know, there's probably so much that we don't know. I'm sure you probably feel similar.
yeah, that's where I go in my new book, Spiritual Intelligence. And you're absolutely right, is we have no idea what we're capable of. I mean, we human beings have potential that is absolutely an order of magnitude greater than what we have assumed. And one of the characteristics of moving toward those levels is happiness. And for
Mm.
example, in the happiness studies I talk about in spiritual intelligence, we hook up monks and nuns, and there are people who've meditated, had a strong spiritual life. Some of them are Tibetan Buddhists, some of them are Christians, some of them are Taoists, some of them are are Kabbalistic Jews, the various kinds of people who really devoted their lives to their own spiritual growth. And we find that based on brain waves, some of them are an astonishing 7 times as happy as the average happy person. And so I use quite a few Sanskrit terms in spiritual intelligence because, like just the way the Eskimos have 200 words for snow, the Sanskrit has many words for levels of joy and happiness. We don't even have these words in the English language because they are so far above what the average person knows. But when we read the brainwaves of these people, these spiritual masters, they are at a level of joy that the average person does not even know exists. And that's the potential. So we have potential for happiness. Along with that comes resilience. And the other thing that comes is creativity. These are highly creative people, highly compassionate people, and they're living at a level which the average human being doesn't even know there's a there. So I really encourage people to explore these methods and again, heal trauma first, go tap first. Don't stop tapping till it's all gone. So go do that first. We'll leave you with some resources to download all you need to do to tap on yourself and find a practitioner. And then start to explore these elevated forms of human consciousness because, again, they're more accessible to us than they've ever been before. And we know from neuroscience that when you apply them, you have a level of joy, a level of exuberance, a level of ecstasy that the average person has no idea even exists.
Wow. Wow. Well, you sort of just answered my very last question for you, but I think I'm still going to ask it in case there's another jewel in there, because I know you've got, a plethora. If there is anybody listening that is thinking, this is incredible information, but I just don't feel like it's doable. I feel like I'm stuck. I feel like, it's great to have the knowledge, but I'm a horrible meditator. I can't sit still for 2 seconds. I don't have the patience, or I just feel like I'm kind of a lost cause. What would you say to somebody like that?
Very, very simple. Download my free eco meditation track and use it every morning for 30 days. It will take you 20 minutes in the morning. Do it the very first thing. And again, it's highly unlikely that the very first time you use it, you won't feel a shift. It's highly unlikely that after you've used it for 30 days, you won't feel very, very different. And we know within 30 days, it shuts down that suffering self part of the brain and it lights up the part of the brain that mediates gratitude, awe, compassion, altruism, ecstasy, all of these positive emotions. So it does both those things at the same time, shuts down the suffering part of the brain, lights up that positive emotion part of the brain. Do that for 30 days, then come back and talk to me.
There you have it. There you have it, my friends. There is your answer. Oh my goodness. Okay, so aside from your website, which you've mentioned, and I will absolutely put this in the show notes, where else can people find you? Are you on social media? Obviously, your books, all three, four of them, plus the one coming out, I'm sure they're, readily available. But if there's any other places that people can go to learn more about you and your work, and also the organizations and so forth, where can they go?
So the first place to start is just download the tapping manual and that free eco meditation track. And both of those are at dawsongift.com. This is just my name, Dawson, Dawson Gift, Gift, dawsongift.com. And there you'll find the free manual and the free eco meditation track. You'll then be on my main website, EFT Universe. There's a link to practitioners there. There's a link to upcoming classes there, virtual events. Like we have science-based insomnia programs, some anxiety programs, PTSD programs, family healing, relationship healing. We have a weight loss program that when people do that program, several clinical trials show they not only lose weight, but they keep it off long term. So all kinds of fabulous things, but those two essentials, the manual and eco meditation, are at dawsongift.com. If you know a veteran who's suffering, send them to stresssolution.org, not .com, .org. the Veteran Stress Solution. They can get free treatment at Stress Solution. We want to help people who are there. If you are a veteran or you know a veteran who's suffering, also have them go to the VA because the VA is now offering EFT inside VA clinics and VA hospitals. So just have to ask for it, and their provider will help them find somebody in the VA who does that. Spiritual Intelligence, the website just went up. It's spiritualintelligencebook.com, and you can download the first two chapters there. It doesn't get it won't be out for a long time, but you can at least read the first part of it there, including those Alzheimer's studies. That's all there at spiritualintelligencebook.com. And I think those are the main initial places to go. At that point, just be guided, be passionate about your well-being. People are so often doing a little bit here and a little bit there for their well-being. Be uncompromising about your well-being. Do those things that'll help you have a better life, and do them rapidly, because every moment, every choice you make, every second, you're deciding what to think, what to do. You're making a decision that has an epigenetic effect. It doesn't have a big effect in the next minute or day, but in a week it does, in a month it does, in 10 years, in 20 years, it has an enormous effect. Optimists live on average 10 years longer than pessimists. 10 years. So
Wow.
health and longevity, it really is cumulative. And so you want to be doing these things now. So the initial thing is dawsongift.com. Download the mini manual, download the Eco Meditation track, use it for 30 days. Very, very simple. And then just love yourself enough to do what it takes to support yourself and having that wonderful life that you deserve and your brain is already hardwired for.
Wow. Well, there's not a better place to end than there. That is, first of all, I really, really appreciate the fact that you have so many resources for people and free resources. So it's like none of us have an excuse. And I just love that you also said, be uncompromising, be passionate about your well-being. Like what's more important also? And yes, of course, like our families and our faith and all of these things, but you have to be present and healthy, I mean, when you have your health, I mean, I realize this is, a situation that doesn't always, there are challenges there too. And some people have terminal things and so forth, but even in those situations, it's like you can still do things, there's always things that you can do. And I feel like we just have to be, like you said, we have to be passionate about elevating and uncompromising, and that there's always a way, I think, to make things better and to to address hard situations and live our lives in just more present, with more presence and with more passion, and therefore, like you said, with more joy. So speaking of joy, this has been an absolute joy. I cannot even tell you. Like I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation so very much. And it's been a lot of food for thought for me as well. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this just amazingness with us. I really appreciate it so, so very much.
Oh, what a joy, to live this way, to wake up every morning, to live in this reality field that you get to live in after a while. It is just a life so good. It's hard to imagine that it could be this wonderful. So I love being there. I love sharing it. I love just being in that place and seeing how science is also able to guide us to these new insights. So I'm living the passionate life and loving it.
Yeah, well, you are definitely contributing to the world. So again, I appreciate it so very much. My friends, all of the information that Dawson has for you, all of the resources, I will make sure that I put those in the show notes. If you have any trouble finding anything, do not hesitate to reach out to me. I will try my hardest to point you in the right direction. Again, take advantage of the things that he is offering. All of this stuff is readily available for you. And so again, like I said earlier, it's almost like we don't have an excuse, but all of that stuff, again, will be in the show notes. Again, Dawson, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I appreciate you so much. And my friends, I will see you on the next episode. Take care and have a beautiful day.